Bapak Ibu, barangkali ini sudah waktunya kita akan memulai. Gustavo, we will start our webinar today. So thank you very much for all of the participants who are coming in this room, Foresta room, and also who are joined in the Zoom. And then in the Zoom there is already there Professor Damayanti Buhari, and here also present Dr. Muhdin, who will opening remark. So then our program today is first we will have opening remark from Dr. Muhdin and Professor Damayanti Buhari, and then we will continue with the presentation from Dr. Gustav Paterno, and then later on we will have a discussion and closing. So that this is our program today. Again, thank you very much for all of you who are coming here. So, baik, kita akan memulai. So, thank you, Pak Muhdin. Maybe I would like to ask first Pak Muhdin to give us the opening remark. Please, Pak Muhdin, you can just. Yeah, but we can use also.
Okay. Baik, terima kasih, Bu Leti. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon to all of us, Mrs. Professor Damayanti Buhari, Director of Center for Transdisciplinary and Sustainability Science, IPB University. Speaker this afternoon webinar, Dr. Gustavo Paterno from Göttingen University. Welcome, thanks for your attending here. Secretary of Department of Forest Management, who is also the moderator of this webinar, Dr. Leti Sundawati, DMNH student, Department of Management of Forest Management student, and Pautan student and IPB student who attend this webinar. Yeah, also you who participate in this webinar offline at Forest Room, Foresta Room, and online through Zoom platform. Alhamdulillah wa syukurillah wala haula wala quwwata illa billah. First of all, we give thanks to the presence of Allah, the Almighty, because it is for His grace and grace that we are all currently still given health and gathered together at a webinar restoring multiple forests of biodiversity and ecosystem functioning in oil palm landscape as known today. Okay. Oil palm plantation have become a dominant feature of many tropical landscape, particularly in Southeast Asia, including Indonesia, where they cover millions of hectares of land. However, the conversion of natural ecosystem to oil palm plantation has resulted in the loss of biodiversity and ecosystem functioning. To restore the degraded forest and land in Indonesia need not the only government policies and program, but also the support from various stakeholders, including universities and research institutes, to find the best solution to overcome the problem. Research collaboration such conducted by IPB with Göttingen University in Germany is very important to find among any other nature-based solution in restoring biodiversity and ecological function of degraded forests and land, including oil palm landscape. I believe that this webinar will give us more knowledge and insight on how we have to conserve and restore our ecosystem in our planet for our better living. Department of Forest Management, Faculty of Forestry and Environment, IPB, very much welcome this webinar, and of course, we would like to express its highest gratitude and appreciation to all parties for their contribution and participation, so that the seminar or webinar this afternoon can be held. Thank you to the Center for Transdisciplinary and Sustainability Sciences, IPB University. Thanks to Professor Damayanti for the collaboration that has been established so far. Thanks to Dr. Gustav Brand Paterno as webinar speaker. Thanks for sharing. Thanks to Mrs. Leti as moderator. Also, thanks for the present and participant of all who are willing to attend this webinar. We hope that the seminar will run well and be useful. May we all always be in good health and always receive mercy, guidance, and protection from Allah Almighty. That's all. Billahi taufiq hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Dr. Muhdin, the head of the department. So, please, Professor Bukhari, to give an opening remark.
Okay, thank you so much. Can you hear me, Ibu Leti?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang. Dr. Muhdin, thank you so much for inviting me to co-host this with your department. And thank you, Ibu Leti, for making this happen. And of course, Gustavo, hello. I haven't seen you for a while, and I'm actually here in Jogja in the venue that we'll be having our CRC closing. So I'm at Grand Hyatt Jogja, trying to see what the view is like, and it's really nice. So looking forward to see you, Gustavo, in October, I think.
Yes.
Okay, so this is a very important talk today. As what Pak Muhdin has said earlier, about the importance of restoring the oil palm landscape, which the whole world is actually looking at us right now, at Indonesia. So the discussion cannot come at the more appropriate time, when Indonesia really needs to show the world that we do care about the environment, and that the oil palm landscape, there are ways, there are methods that we can develop and implement in the field on how to make oil palm sustainable. So it's the research that Göttingen, IPB, Tadulako, and Jambi has been working for the past 11, almost 12 years. It's really breaking through all frontiers. It's a time of excitement to learn about the new knowledge that has been developed, and it's really wonderful that Gustavo will be sharing that with us. So GSSS, as a center that is focusing on sustainability, is really excited about this talk, because we want to learn a lot from Gustavo and his team. So I'm very delighted to be here with you, and thank you so much, Gustavo, for making the time and for having this next 1.5 hours or so for the discussion. So looking forward to hear your talk, and also looking forward to hear the discussion that will come from all the participants. So thank you also to all the participants for being here, and thank you so much, Ibu Leti. Back to you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Damayanti, Bukhari. And then without further ado, so I will give the time to Gustavo. Please, you can start your presentation.
Okay. Maybe I need to share first my screen. 1 minute. Can you hear me well? No?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Okay.
Very clear.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Then I will share.
You can hear.
Okay, can you see the presentation in the screen? Just to be sure. Okay.
Yep.
Then 1 second. Okay. Then first of all, I would like to thank you very much, Ibu Leti, Dr. Muhdin, and Professor Damayanti. It's really It's a great honor for me to be here with all you, presenting a little bit of the work we have been doing in integrating results from the Facets B experiment. So with that said, I will go on with my presentation, and I apologize for not including some translations in some points. So everything is in English also in the slides, and I'm happy to share the slides with everyone later. So I will talk today about restoring facets of biodiversity and ecosystem functioning in oil palm landscapes. And the presentation is divided in 4 parts. So a little bit introduction of the need and the benefits to restore degraded ecosystems. Then we zoom into our region here, Southeast Asia, rainforest, biodiversity and transformation. Then I will introduce the Facets B experiment and the long-term results of this experiment in the last 10 years. So to start, biodiversity crisis. First, I would like to highlight that most natural ecosystems worldwide are impacted to some degree, or they will be in the near future. So this map shows the human footprint of which is an integrated index of several indices. So close to cities, intensity of urbanization, and they are stacked together. That shows how much human impact there is on each grid cell. So you can see that most of the world is already at some point degraded or impacted by our activities. Therefore, there is extensive need to restore ecosystems, and this will be a key strategy. Restoration will be a key strategy for nature conservation. So I will start discussing this, what we call the human impact loop, where we are here on the top affecting global change. So our scale of impact is not local anymore, it's global. We are changing climate, we are changing nutrient cycles, we are changing large-scale land use. And this has direct effect on biodiversity and also direct effect on ecosystem functions, for instance, climate change or land use change. And when we also, again, reduce biodiversity, this further reduces ecosystem functioning, which then also affects ecosystem services. So the contributions that nature gives to people, to society, are also reduced. And this then loops back to us. We also lose. Everyone loses. So this is a human impact loop that we need to tackle in this century. And one question that we usually ask is, can we restore these ecosystems? Can we actually do something about it? And this is Floresta da Tijuca in Brazil, which was completely degraded. And in the 1900s, Dom Pedro II planted 100,000 trees, and now we have a national park there. And it's you can see how it looks like. Several fauna is coming back, and it's a complete different ecosystem. And another example from Sebastião Salgado, who brought, it's a famous photographer in Brazil, who brought this land devastated. And together with collaborators in the university, they restored this into a complete new system. So we can restore ecosystems, but we need to understand to what extent and how are we restoring this. So one meta-analysis published in 2009, for instance, show that for biodiversity on this bar here, there is great improve for supporting and regulating ecosystem services also. So we can restore ecosystems, and we can restore part of the biodiversity and ecosystem functioning. But when we compare this to reference ecosystems, so forests or the reference ecosystem being analyzed, then we can see that actually we don't fully recover. So we can only recover part of this. So some ecosystems will never be able to restore to at least its original range of variability. So it's rather really important to avoid losing primary ecosystems, primary forests, and trying to restore them later. Once we have restored, they can change a little bit and have a global impact as a global community on this impact loop. So if restoration change also global drivers and increase biodiversity, it will also cascade down towards improving ecosystem functioning and also improving ecosystem services, and this will loop back to us. So restoration can act in this loop of impacts, reverting part of the losses and promoting a better functioning of the system and better services to society. And on this plot here, from this meta-analysis from Hennet Benayas in 2009, what he's showing here is that the response ratio of biodiversity has a positive effect on the response ratio of services, meaning that when you improve biodiversity, you also improve the services that are provided. So when you restore biodiversity, you also restore part of this functioning. I want to highlight that we are now on the decade ecosystem restoration for the next between 2021 and 2030, and ecological restoration will be then an important conservation act for global biodiversity, and this is from the United Nations. So there's a global effort to restore degraded ecosystems, to improve biodiversity and functioning of services. So after this introduction for the to restore systems, now I will zoom in into Southeast Asia ecosystems. So this was recently published by our colleague Lirong Kai from Göttingen, where she mapped plant diversity across the whole planet using checklists, an eco checklist, and then she mapped the taxonomic diversity and the phylogenetic richness of every grid cell. And what she's showing there is that in this global map here, reddish colors are the regions with highest taxonomic and phylogenetic diversity. And what it shows is that tropical rainforests in Southeast Asia are a unique center of plant taxonomic and phylogenetic diversity. So this region is very unique and very special. In addition to that, in another work, she investigated phylogenetic endemism, which is a metric that captures how are lineages that are very old, so plant lineages that are very old and distinct, and also restrict to small areas, so endemic to small geographic areas. And again, what she shows here is that Southeast Asia, it is really important as a center of paleo-endemism. And Sumatra, for instance, is within the top 10 centers of plant phylogenetic paleo-endemism. And this means that this region hosts old and range-restrict lineages. So there are really old plant lineages that exist here, and they are also restricted to this region. So they only exist here. So preserving this species for plants, meaning that you're preserving a big part of the tree of life, of the evolutionary history of this region. This is not pre-reviewed yet, but it's open as a preprint and should be published somewhere soon. This plot here also shows that this phylogenetic endemism increases towards the equator. So it's not only Southeast Asia, the tropical belt is really key for preserving evolutionary history of plants. So what does this mean? Is that any loss of biodiversity in these regions would cause a disproportionately large loss of evolutionary history, which might be associated with irreplaceable ecological and functional characteristics. So this is one of the main reasons why we cannot lose species or diversity in these regions. We are losing much more evolutionary history than any other place. But Southeast Asia is not only a plant hotspot of diversity. It's biodiversity hotspot overall, with several endemic species also from other groups, not only plants. So it's even more important to consider as a whole ecosystem. Unfortunately, also a deforestation hotspot, and this then can threaten most of the species, animal and plant. So biodiversity is under threat. And as was mentioned by Dr. Muhdin before in the introduction, there is a huge increase in oil palm production, covering millions of hectares, and between the 80s and 2012, 100 million of hectares of tropical forests were converted to farmland. And this is then a major threat to tropical biodiversity, which is a hotspot of biodiversity in the world. And here we can see, for instance, this graph from Prof et al. 2016, that forest drops down in area while oil palm and rubber and bush is increasing through time. And oil palm, therefore, is also an important driver of deforestation in its rapid expansion. And it's also related to the global demand for oil palm. The whole planet needs palm oil. Therefore, that's why it's being planted everywhere. It's very profitable. It's increasing a lot in Indonesia and Malaysia, which account already for 63% of the area of land use dedicated to. But it's also very beneficial to society in terms of producing wealth and supporting families' well-being and agriculture. Oil palms, you likely know better than me, are cultivated in monoculture. They are planted in 7 to 10 years apart. Usually, manual weeding or fertilizers and herbicides are applied. Each tree can be productive for 25 years. And it's definitely the most efficient oil crop, because you can produce a lot of oil per hectare compared to other crops, for instance, rapeseed and so on. So with this, I want to zoom in some of the known effects of converting tropical rainforest into palm plantations. So when we do, there's a general understanding now that we use biodiversity, ecosystem function, and evolutionary history. In this, for example, from Clark, they analyze different ecosystem functions indicated in the petal graph. On the left, you see that most of the indicators, nutrient retention, stability of climatic condition, genetic diversity, naturalness, carbon storage, are higher in comparison to the oil palm, which has harvest biomass more than the others, because you're harvesting palm oil, palm fruit. So there is a great decrease in biodiversity and ecosystem functions. Also, there is reduction. This by Yayan Kuzma et al. Shows that for understory plants, there is a great loss of evolutionary history and an increase in plant as the dots. This is a genetic tree of understory plants growing in a forest ecosystem and in oil ecosystems, and you can see many more invasive species, alien species occurring, and also the red family here, the red taxa here are basically families that are absent. So we are also losing entire family representativeness in this ecosystem. And there is also a big change in the structural complexity of forests. So it's just one figure, but I will show data later, where you can see a comparison of vertical strata of forest and how much complexity you lose when you convert several layers, different trees with heights, subtrees, divergent trees and they're providing habitat for different species compared to a more homogeneous tree height and understory. So profit in this plot, it's a big analysis by Ingo. Also in the region of Jambi, they show that profit gains came at the expense of ecosystem multifunctionality, indicating that converting forest to oil palm can far from deterioration. So this is important because, of course, the land also provides more profit, but at the cost of reducing dramatically biodiversity of several groups. So here you have the relationship between profit on the y-axis and diversity on the y-axis for some groups. So you can see that birds, bats, butterflies, and several groups are decreasing while profit increase. So we need to deal with this and find a way to improve this relationship. Now, to the third part, I ask, oh, maybe is it not changing? Okay. Present efforts B experiment, which aims to understand if it's possible to alleviate the environmental impacts of oil palm plantations without compromising yield. That's the main question of this experiment. So, I'm waiting a little bit for the slide to change. Okay. It's okay. So here I have the same figure again, but now we ask if enriching oil palm plantations, so we have the landscape of palm plantation, what happens if you enrich these plantations by including trees, small tree islands with this plantation, and we ask this promote the recovery of biodiversity and ecosystem. And we also, what will happen if you simply allow for natural regeneration in these oil palm plantations? Natural regeneration is stopped in palm plantations because you use herbicides and weeding to avoid plants to establish there, so they don't compete with palm. We ask what will happen if we do allow for natural regeneration. Does this improve ecosystem functioning? Does this improve? What happened? Many trees will be able to colonize the area or not? So why natural regeneration is important? Because it's been shown several meta-analyses that natural regeneration is a successful strategy to recover ecosystem services and biodiversity in degraded forests. So here you can see the effect size on this plot of treatments, and you see that natural regeneration has a strong positive effect in comparison to degraded site for biodiversity. And therefore, natural regeneration is a key for achieving cost-effective large-scale restoration, because you allow for the plants to establish naturally without spending too much resources to plant this. So this experiment also will allow natural regeneration in oil palm plantations, and this is a key aspect of the efforts B experiment. The other question we could ask is, what is the size of these tree islands? Should we plant trees everywhere, or should we create small patches or large patches within the oil palm matrix? So this question is important because maybe if you have a very small tree island, this will not have enough size to attract birds, to attract dispersers, and to promote regeneration, for instance. And this is shown on this plot here, where plot size with different sizes, have different numbers of seeds arriving per year, and small plots have very little. So this experiment will also manipulate not only planting trees, but also the size of these trees. And the main questions the experiment is aiming to answer is if enriching palm plantations with native trees promote the restoration of biodiversity and functioning. How does plot size and diversity of trees control natural regeneration? And what are trade-offs between tree islands and palm yield? So now I will introduce the efforts B experiment design. So efforts B is part of a large global network of diversity experiments called 3DVNet. You can see there in this map several experiments that exist around the world that follow the same statistical design that varies diversity of planted trees and monitor what this causes in functioning. Efforts B is here, was established around 10 years ago in lowlands of Jambi, Sumatra, Indonesia, inside a conventional industrial oil palm plantation, which has 9x9 triangular grid and 143 oil palms per hectare, and usually use fertilizer application, manual weeding, and herbicides to control planting. So this is one picture of the region from Google Earth. You can see it's dominated by palm plantations. And for reaching these plantations, 6 species were selected. They are native to the region. So 3 fruiting trees, Parkia speciosa, Petai, Archidendron giring, Gencol, Durian, and 2 woody trees, so Peronia canense and Shoria leprosula, and 1 rubber tree, Tyria polyphylla, that were planted on this experiment. And the experimental design is a large-scale experiment with 52 tree islands. This is the distribution of tree islands. The tree islands vary in size. They can be 25, 100, 400, or 1600 square meters. So 5x5, 10x10, 20x20, or 40x40. And they also vary in species. So some of these tree islands have no planted trees, 0. Another group 1, so either one of the 6 species, a combination of 2 species, a combination of 3 species, or all the species planted together in a mix. Every time a species mix, they have equal proportions. So if you plant 2 species, they are equally they are planted in equal proportions, so the same number of individuals per species every time. And in addition to that, to increase light availability, 40% of the oil palm, maybe I can, yeah. If you look on these plots here, you can see the oil palms cut. So 40% of the oil palms were cut, and this then increases light availability for the trees to grow. In addition, we have 4 control plots in oil palm as usual. So in the standard industrial scale plantation with no other treatments, continuation of fertilization and so on. On top of that, on the tree islands, after plantation and the trees, all management was ceased. So no fertilizer application, no weeding, and no herbicides. Okay. And just to give you an overview, this is how one plot looks from okay. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, how they look from the top and also from the front. And in this other slide, you can see from inside one with 1 planted species and 1 plot with 6 species. Yeah. It's a bit delayed. Then I will give a short overview of what do we monitor on these plots. We monitor every planted tree. We monitor all palm trees. So every palm tree, how they grow, if they're inside and outside. We also monitor the yield, so how much fruits they are producing. We also monitor palm trees adjacent to the plot to see if the tree islands have an effect on outside the plots. We monitor natural regeneration and environmental complexity and canopy cover and so on. And besides that, we also perform multidisciplinary campaigns involving several groups, several researchers to have a whole ecosystem assessment. So not only looking at plants, but looking at root competition, temperature, vegetation complexity, water infiltration, soil microbes, bacteria, bats, birds, the yield of other plants. Like now Genco is fruiting, so how much fruits are also coming from Genco, soil fauna, root diversity, and many other metrics that capture the functioning and the diversity of these ecosystems. And to give more details about my main focus, which is natural regeneration, what we did was to measure all freestanding wood plants, trees, shrubs, and bamboos in the plots, which were higher than 1.3 meters. They were recorded in 3 years, so in 2020 and now last year also, but I'm presenting here results from 2020. Then we built phylogenetic trees and also collected for every tree functional traits. So specific leaf area, wood density, maximum height, life form, and dispersal syndrome. With this, I gave a introduction of what is FFortsP and what are the main monitoring activities we have. How is the experimental design? And now I will present a summary and an overview of the most important results. So first, I will show a little bit on the tree performance. What happened with the trees we planted? So more than 6,000 trees were planted. What happened with them? And they are... So here on this plot, maybe I will wait. Yeah, we have here on the y-axis, and we have tree survival in percentage in the y-axis. And what we see is that 3 species are doing quite well. Peronema, Archidendron, and Parkia are surviving quite a lot. Specifically, Peronema, more than 95% of the individuals survive. So they're extremely successful in the region. On the other hand, we have another group of 3 species, specifically Dúrio and Shoria are doing not so well. So most of Shoria species didn't survive, and also Dúrio. And Didia is in the middle, but around 20% of the individuals survive. Besides this high mortality for some species, all the species are growing continuously. So this is the average height of the individuals. So they are growing in basal area, but also in height. So those that survive are growing, and they are continuously growing through the time. Looking at plot level, here I'm showing a graph where each color represents one diversity level. So plots with 1 species planted, plots with 2, plots with 3, and plots with 6 species. Right? And we have tree survival at the plot level, regardless of species. And what we see here is that for 9 plots, more than 90% of the planted trees, and for 3 plots, all trees died. And this mostly are the small plots, so you don't have so many trees. So 100% can mean only 6 trees in this case. And also most of the plots that trees are dying a lot are the monoculture ones, all 2 species. Non-plot with 3 or 6 species has 100% mortality. This means that it's kind of a risk buffering. When you plant more species, you also increase the chance that the different strategies will provide more stability to mortality, because while one might not adapt very well, the other can survive. Or if the environmental change, the condition in 1 year it's really dry, then some species might be better than the other. And this asynchrony in the strategies, I'm not showing this here. We analyzed that species asynchrony is what is providing stability. So my master's student that's starting now did a pre-project on this, and he showed that species asynchrony is related to planted richness. So if you plant more, species are more, have asynchrony in the response, and this is what also buffering more stability. We have a very impressive data set because every tree is mapped, so we know exactly where they are and what are their sizes. And in this plot, you can see 2 examples in how a monoculture of Didia in a very large plot died in 2016, most likely because of a big crop that we had. And the same didn't happen. And you can see how the mixed 6 species survived much better. So so every crop is 1 tree that died. The diameter, the length of the circle is the basal area of each tree. And the color are different species. And what I want to highlight here is that there is a spatial structure on how these trees are dying. Another analysis from the same student, Tatsuro, showed that if the tree is closer to oil palm, they have a higher chance of dying. This is most likely because of competition. And the other important aspect is that once a tree dies, this also might open space for natural regeneration. So because this project also allows for regeneration, we also think that now trees are being replaced by naturally established ones. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the natural regeneration part and present some results on plant taxonomic, evolutionary, and functional diversity. After 8 years of the start of the experiment, more than 4,000 trees and woody species established spontaneously in this experiment. They come from 65 different species. So we have already, now actually with 2022, we already have around 70 plant species, woody plant species that naturally established on this region. The great majority is native, associated to secondary succession, but also 30% are associated to forests. And the huge majority, 75%, is animal dispersed, which is an interesting result. So most of them are dispersed by birds or bats. The top 3 species are species common to secondary succession, like Macaranga, Trichocarpa, and Elastoma malabratricum. But also we have, for example, Ficus variegata growing very well on these sites. They're starting naturally and growing. These trees that naturally established are now growing quite well. You can see here one Ficus variegata tree already fruiting in 2022. this tree is by itself, and now it's growing and rooting and attracting animals, for instance. And this is the distribution of height and deviate. So most of those trees are still below 10 meters. But we do have some very large trees that establish and that are growing alone. And you can see on this next picture how big they are. Maybe with some delay. Okay, yeah. And on the other picture also, you can see how the planted species vary in height. And the planted species, some are higher than 15 meters. Some are up to 20 meters already. So they are growing very well. And you can see that because this experiment in a tropic region, actually trees grow very fast. So restoration can also be catalyzed by this growth. And to look at diversity patterns, this plot shows 3 columns and 2 rows. On the first column, taxonomic, the second phylogenetic, and the third functional diversity of the regenerating trees. And on the y-axis, on the first column, we have oil palm, no planting, meaning our natural regeneration only, monoculture, so planting only one species, or mixture, planting several species. And you can see that taxonomic, phylogenetic, and functional diversity increases with increasing planting species. And it's greatly higher than what's going on oil palm. And additionally, this also increases with plot area. And this diversity index, their hill diversity, they were already standardized to sampling effort, meaning that it's not area effect. It's not plots are larger. These is already with rarefaction. So this area you see on the plots below shows that something else. So the larger plots are not only larger and receiving more species because they are large, but they also providing different environmental conditions for different species to survive. So offering more diversity. And on the next figure, you see a path analysis showing what is controlling this diversity. So I asked if the plots that are close to forest or the plots that are close to isolated trees. So around this region, there are trees that are not palm trees, and they were mapped by drones. So we count them, and we know for every plot how many trees are in a 100-meter buffer. And we also know the distance to the closest forest and so on. But these landscape variables didn't have an effect. Surprisingly, I thought that close to the forest would increase diversity, but it was not the case. The most important factors are the planted diversity. So planting more species promoted more species, and larger plots promoted more species, more diversity. And also one other important variable was soil nitrogen, carbon, and bulk density. So basically the soil packed. So this also promoted regeneration. And this shows a very important aspect, that diversity begets diversity. So by planting more diversity, we generate more diversity on the regenerating species. And now coming to the part of the results. So we all these effects, actually I have one. So all these effects, this is a paper from Clara Zemp, the restoration of structural complexity. This is on how much 3D filling, so how much of the vegetation, how much of the space is occupied by vegetation. This is what this metric measures. This is done by laser scanning, and then we estimate the structural of vegetation, and with this we know how much vegetation is everywhere in the space. And what you see here is that oil palm has the lowest and plant and forest has the highest. Planting 1 to 6 greatly increase towards forest, still not as high as forest, but it's higher than oil palm. So planting this mixed species promotes complexity. Data from 2018, and now my student and we are looking at if this is continuing to increase, because we measured again in 2022. So we are really curious to see if we are further closer to forest complexity or if we stabilize at some point. And again, complexity is increased by diversity. So if you put realized richness against structural complexity, you can see that regardless of plot size, there is an increase. So if you plant more, you generate more natural regeneration. And if you plant more, you also generate more complexity. When I say plant more, I mean more diversity, more different types of species. And now finally getting to the last results. This is a summary and a synthesis paper that also Dr Leti and Damayanti are also involved. And this is led by Clara, and it was really accepted in Nature. We are super happy with this paper. And this shows that tree islands, so in this plot, there are spider plots. You have, in green, you have the tree islands. In gray, you have the conventional oil palm plantation. And each petal, so each part of this spider plot is one taxa. So bats, birds, insects, understory plants, pollen, seeds, trees, and so on. And different diversity indexes, either species richness or Simpson. Also rarefied to area. And with this, there is clear evidence that tree islands promote multidiversity for several groups, although some groups are not higher in the trees, but overall there is a positive effect. And also, by looking at 19 ecosystem functions, this study shows that tree islands also promotes multifunctionality, specifically increasing soil P, soil C, and water infiltration. And number 1 here is plot level palm yield. So on average, there was no significant reduction in productivity or palm yield, which means that with several benefits, there's very little trade-off with yield up to now. This trade-off, however, is increasing through time. We already have an indication of this. We are starting to analyze this long-term change. We expect that on the next years, on the next analysis, this will start to increase. However, the analysis needs to consider also that we are not applying fertilizers on not weeding or herbicides. So even if you lose a little bit of yield, economically you still might be, we will know soon in the next 2-3 years if we actually still even more profitable to have treatments or not. But what we know is that palm is yet until 2018, and so was not really compromised by tree islands. So as stakeholder messages, I would like to highlight establishing large and diverse tree islands within palm plantations can promote the restoration of several facets of biodiversity, especially through natural regeneration. Combining tree planting with natural regeneration can be a cost-effective strategy to catalyze the recovery of taxonomic, phylogenetic, and functional diversity. And I also want to highlight the role of tree diversity and plot size, enhancing multiple biodiversity and ecosystem functioning, but also ecosystem complexity and structure. We need to know what are the challenges, for instance, increasing trade-offs with palm yield. So these are the next chapters. Implementing this at larger scale, is it possible? What are the costs and trade-offs? There's also increased risk associated to increased forest complexity. For instance, the palm plantation is open and you can just go around, and rich plots are secondary forests already. They look like they are very complex, and therefore there are more snakes. It's difficult to walk around, to harvest yield, and so on. The perspectives are, what are the implications at larger scales? Can we also do this with other crop systems? And what will be the long-term successional trajectories of these ecosystems? And with this, I would like to acknowledge the huge group of Collaborative Research Center 9900 efforts, which is responsible for all these results that I'm presenting here. So I'm only speaking on behalf of this huge team, counting with hundreds of collaborators in Indonesia, in the field, in Germany, in Göttingen, working together as a big team to make this happen. So I'm actually thank everyone. And also to not leave behind the core team of efforts be in the field, our crucial field assistants and research assistants in the field, Edward, Sihan, Krisman, Vizda, Juvita, and Julian D. And many others from the other sub-projects that also work hard with us to produce all this data. And with this, I would like to end, and I'm happy to take questions, and I'm very happy to discuss anything with you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Paul. It is very interesting presentation, I think. So if you have any question, you can raise hand. Maybe some question for that, for you start. Maybe from the Zoom, is there someone like to ask question? So please, you can raise hand. Anyone from the Zoom platform? Oh, one. Okay. Maybe we can start with the question first. So please, you can introduce yourself.
Okay. My name is Rita. I am Rita from Conservation Tropical, the graduate program under Faculty of Forestry. It's very good to hear your presentation because it's like we are not alone. You or somebody there are watching us to see also how biodiversity forest, which is, well, it's sad to see how the change happen, but it's also there's something on and we can do something with the restoration. My question to you is, where is your inspiration to take this long study? I mean, 8 years, it's you must have like energy or motivation that makes you think, okay, why the restoration we choose for this study. And I know, like in Europe, you used to have a forest too, right? And then it's gone. And what happened now? I mean, is there any lesson learned that can take from that losing forest that maybe we can add here and there or modify in situation right now? And what is the next thing that you see? I mean, your presentation said that you can have forest inside palm oil, right? Or there's a hope that can be a forest inside the palm oil. Is there also the possibility the wildlife, say like the babi hutan, yeah, the roar, is that possible that can also develop there? I mean, because we know like suku anak dalam there, they depend on the pig for their protein source. So, I mean, I didn't, you mentioned about the snake, but is there any other wildlife that grow there?
Would you like to answer this question because it's a little bit long, maybe?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, otherwise I won't. Thank you, Scott, for your questions. I will try to make a summary. So first, this project, like I mentioned, is not mine. So I'm not the one working for 8 years on this collection. So it's a long-term DFG funding, and I'm actually arriving in the last 3 years. So I'm taking care of the natural regeneration research and looking into the data and analyzing, but the team is like hundreds of people working together. And this is a very special case of funding from Germany, funding agents, DFG, where they actually make this long-term. So together with Indonesia and Göttingen University, they wrote a big proposal and got a long-term funding. So and this was evaluated in 3 phases, and every phase was evaluated. And Leti and, for instance, Damayanti can explain much more the details about the history of this than I can. But that's a special funding for long-term, which is really important because we have very few long-term research, and we can only know things when we look at for longer. So it's really important. The second about restoring and learning lessons in terms of Europe and tropical forests, what I can say is that, for instance, Germany lost all its forests. But there is not, and they are restoring a lot, and now you have a lot of forests back. But we cannot compare this in the same way, because it's different to restore European forests than to restore a tropical lowland forest. I would say that the main lesson is that we should not follow this path to lose everything and then try to restore. Specifically for what I have mentioned in the introduction, that we have unique evolutionary history that's hosted only here. And once lost, it's erased from Earth, and we cannot afford this as a society and a planet. So I would stand that this is the main lesson. What we are doing here is trying to alleviate impacts of areas that were already degraded, because this will be very important also, on top of conserving primary areas. Yeah. Okay.
No, but my question is not to the project, but to you as a scientist. I mean, well, I'm on PhD program, so I'm struggling with how to find the one research topic. So I just want to know your personal motivation of this restoration.
I have been involved in restoration since my bachelor's, by looking in dry forests in Brazil, where I did my bachelor and master's. How can we improve restoration? So I have been always connected to this topic, and my motivation is because I grew up in Brazil. I grew up going into forests. I grew up going into parks, and that's I think later on when I did my bachelor's and so on, I learned what this means scientifically. but also there is a deep connection to nature. That's my main motivation, even for science. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think it's enough, yeah. Okay, so there is two questions from the first one is Bayu. You can start your question. Yeah, so please.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, Gustav and ibu-ibu, bapak-bapak sekalian dari penyelenggara IPB. I live in Bali, Denpasar, Gustav. I'm not a forestman or the other things, horticulture. My background is civil engineer, but interested in forest right now. So my question is, when you say the combine of the plant or oil plantation with another plant, it's really good idea because biodiversity like as biodynamic or permaculture, they're also supporting biodiversity in one area on land. Why the durian, it's most favorite in Indonesia, also Indonesia, cannot grow. And the other things like I don't think it's hardwood, but it's woods, yeah, like sungkai. Sungkai most probably they use for interior things, furniture. Then the other things is jengkol and pete. They can survive the combined with the oil palm plantation. For me, why durian cannot grow, or another things, fruit plant can also combine with the oil palm tree. And how about the horticultura? The big industry with oil palm may be also interesting if the combining plant or companion plant can also have good yield or good income. When the oil palm reduce a little bit, they can get another income from the other plant or other fruit and everything. Okay, for the first, I have two questions. Why durian cannot grow? And then the other things is, can we combine with horticultural things like that? And then what the best another companion plant when we're talking about the oil plantation? Thank you. Ya, terima kasih Bapak Ibu.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Pak Bayu. So he has the question. I think you understand it.
Yeah.
So you can answer it.
Okay. Thank you very much for your questions. So I would say durian mostly died in this 2016 drought, and we don't know exactly the exact reason, but we know that many of those trees from the 2016 died and there was a drought. And the other possible reason is in some plots we have strong flooding. And some are almost permanent flooding, and this can also cause big mortality. So I would say when you start this type of experiment, there's always a risk that some species will not adapt locally, because even if they are from the region, the specific local condition where we force them to be by planting them there might not be adequate. And that's why this is one of the reasons that planting a more diversity can also offer this natural risk protection, because some will do well, some will do not so well, and this balance out a little bit. So I would say that drought was important for durian mortality. And just to answer, to provide some answer.
Did they plant in the same year, the same age, durian and then jengkol and everything, same height and then same years when you plant it?
Yeah. Yeah, mostly same they mostly were the same size. On average, of course, this came from local nurseries, and there was some variation in size, but on average, they were very similar 1 year old, 1 to 2 years old seedlings. So there is some unknown factors there that we cannot explain, but
Thank you.
it is definitely related to this species that went bad. And to your second question, I would say definitely yes, we can. And I would say most likely this would be a good idea. We have no experimental data in efforts B for that. I would say first step would be to discuss with local stakeholders and farmers what crops would work better, what type of crops they have experience with, or they are willing to try, because every new idea for farmers, it's complicated.
Dia mau ngejemput kita, dia mau nelfon teman.
So what I can say is that I had also previous experience with agroforestry in Brazil and with farmers. And it's really difficult if you propose a new idea for them, but you cannot tell them that it's going to work. You say, hey, let's try this, but you don't give, you cannot tell them it's going to be good. So we need to start an experiment.
They want to experiment and they want to know how it works, isn't it? And then, okay, the last one. If we have 1,000 meters square, what the ideally we make the combining island? How big the size? How per hectare is
the ideal size? The ideal size is the 1600, 40 by 40.
40 by 40.
Or at least 20 by 20, because this was a big difference in everything.
Make for different spot. Let's say 5 by 5 here and then 5 by 5 over there. So with how long the distance? Do we have study for about that?
No, we cannot. We will analyze how different proportions of plot sizes with modeling will be performed, so we can expect better. So, okay, if you have this amount of land, then you should have only large plots, or you should have a mix of large and small. This was not analyzed yet. Yeah. What I can say is that for significant effects on plot level, we need at least 20 by 20 plots. So, yeah.
Okay.
But it's still under debate, right? It is only my guess now.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Pak Bayu, for your question. So we will move to the next question from Noel. So you please. Noel.
Thank you, Leti. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Gustavo, how are you?
Very well.
I hope that you still remember me.
Yes.
Okay. I wouldn't ask you questions, but I would give some information since I just returning from Pematang Kabau last month in Jambi. System. I hope it could be a new highlight for us. And as you already knew that last October we invite 21 farmers to the people, and farmers determine several criteria and indicators before they select the proper native trees to be intercrop. such as a planting distance of oil palm, market price of the native tree, how about the maintenance of or tree care, post-harvest process, seedling provision, and lastly is about ease of selling of the native tree. Based on those criteria, farmers tend to select first durian, and second is a matoa. I just know it, matoa. Maybe all of you know it better than me. If they want to start it, they would like to select matoa and durian. Besides that, farmers also need further education related to jelutong and agarwood. Those are something new for them. And I just returned last month from Pematang Kabau for doing my qualitative research. Related, thank you very much for your support. What were the statement from farmers against the intercropping system? First, they worry about the declining of the yield of the fresh fruit bunches. Even though we have stated that the result of the B-plot trial show that the decrease in yield of fresh fruit bunches was not significant. And they still obtain yields from the other native tree. For them, oil palm is still the highest income compared with the other crops. They don't want to sacrifice oil palm plantation for something that they don't know for sure about the yields per hectare. As a key information, from the results of deep interview with some informants, it was found that perception of farmers, they interpret sustainability only for this present orientation or living for today. It is obviously clear that the economic side is dominant, but we can combine it with other aspects, of course, culture and ecology. And secondly, we believe that intercropping systems are the real form of economic sustainability or viable activity. However, at the farm level, it might be necessary to experiment with the intercropping of oil palm trees when the oil palm are being replanted or rejuvenated. Remember, farmer needs other incomes because the oil palm cannot be harvested for the first 3 or 4 years. This is the right moment to offer intercropping to farmers, such as with corn, watermelon, or other native fruits that have added value and easy to sell in the pilot villages. Finally, I think a role model or potential transformer is needed for testing the intercropping system in every village. Many studies show that sustainable development can be accelerated through localized activism and the growth of civil society actor local expertise. The farm experience of the villagers, most of whom work as farmers, will influence their perception of type of sustainability measures. By choosing cosmopolitan farmers who have an innovative spirit, intercropping activities can be sustainable and at the end can influence the actions of other farmers to be involved in increasing the biodiversity in their oil palm plantations. That's all something that I would like to share to you. Thank you very much, Gustavo and Yara.
Thank you, Noel. So maybe you have some comment on that, Gustavo, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Noel. I think this is one of the greatest strengths of this large project, because we have ecologists like myself looking into plant results, but then we also have social research in groups looking in how the farms perceive, and without this connection we cannot make much progress. So these results are presented, they can give you support on how to discuss and make suggestions and hear what are the feedback So I think this is really great, and the information you bring, it's what makes sense to me also. So the experimental results, they give you, let's say, a starting point to discuss how can this be implemented. And the farmers need security. That's what I also learned when I was working with agroforestry and farmers. And they are only willing to implement something if they can have certainty, or if they have some idea of the outcome. Or they cannot afford to play around because they need to sustain their families and income. So I think this connection is really good, Noel. This feedback is really interesting. This idea of intercropping at the early stages is also very interesting. I think this is really reasonable. And also fast growing, easy to sell on local markets would be very ideal. And there's also one possibility that by having examples, so they are not willing to plant some species they don't know, they would not start this. But if in the community there is one example, there's one successful prior, let's say, pilot experiment that they can visit, that they can see it works and so on, and this then can help them to develop trust. But we need this to happen slowly, and in this nice communication that your work, for instance, is doing, bringing direct connection with the farmers, getting local perception, which it's fundamental. Otherwise, doesn't matter doing this research if people are not willing to implement, right? So I think that's a big strength of this whole efforts. So many groups come together, and interdisciplinary knowledge is what is pushing society changes. Okay, yeah, thank you very much for your feedback. I want to talk to you later also.
So, okay, thank you, Noel. There is one question on the chat box. Maybe you can see there. From the first one. There is two questions from Ramabudi. Maybe the first one, you can read it. Yeah. So, where is this? My name is Rama from Tropical Biodiversity Conservation under Policy Faculty. Okay, I would like to ask question: can we define the three species based on above ground biodiversity needs, such as seed plant for bird?
I think this is in the case of this experiment, they aim at multi-purpose species, so they are fruiting or woody or rubber, so they can directly benefit the farmers. So that was the idea behind this 6 species, right? So species that at some point will either promote yield or give some income at later stages. So if I understand your question correctly, if you're aiming only at ecological restoration, and then of course you should include species, for instance, that are attracting birds, because this will be a strong catalyzer of natural regeneration, as we see. But also, tree islands by themselves seem to attract birds, because they are providing a place for the birds to come, and fruits, and they also attract monkeys, and they also attract other animals and bats. And also Hita asked if there are other wildlife happening. I forgot to answer that, and I take the opportunity now. And now we're going to start with one master student from Germany that's here in Jambi now, and I will go to Jambi after today. And we will start monitoring with camera traps small and mid-sized mammals. So we will have a better understanding on how these tree islands promote small and mid-sized mammals. But we know already that wild boars are around the area, and and yeah, and a lot of monkeys.
So I think there is a second question from Pak Arin April from Sriwijaya University. Hello, Pak Arin April. How are you? This is he's my colleague. So there is 3 questions. So you can just read it.
Oops. How can we be consistent? I think it's comments.
Richard.
Chat, yeah.
Yeah.
How can ecologists be consistent in a sustainable? Okay. Yes. I think this is so 3 questions that are connected to one big question: how do we evaluate restoration success in this case, or economic outcome? So there are several metrics that we can look at, and I think it's really hard for ecologists to be consistent because different people are doing different types of measurements. But I would say here we have a very unique opportunity because we have several metrics being evaluated together. So not only if the trees are dead or not, but how is the complexity of the vegetation changing, and how many other groups are also present, and insects and soil fauna and nutrients. So I would say if you have several metrics that capture ecosystem properties, but not only functions like you mentioned or services, I don't think you can only be based on one or the other. I would say you need to understand biodiversity in different dimensions. So the taxa per se, how many groups are responding, and the functioning of important properties of the ecosystem, like complexity of the system or soil infiltration, because this will affect water quality at the larger scale, and nutrient retention, carbon sequestration, and so on. So these different functions that can provide different services needs to be integrated together. It is hard to be consistent, but there are some standards existing to assess this in a more standardized and sort of consistent way. Yeah, I hope I did answer a little bit your question.
Also, Pak Arin April is still in discussion, so he cannot speak. But I think your explanation is good enough. I think it's already answered the question. So now I will see well, we still have time actually. If there is still someone would like to ask from here, from the room or from the Zoom, is there any other question? No question, but I think if there is no question, is also we actually in our invitation we until 5:30 until 3:30. Yes, so it's already actually it's already more than 1.5 hours. So to everybody, I would like to thank you for your participation. I just would like to a little bit highlighted what Gustavo has already mentioned. This is for me, it's I think really very important that we could not lose our important marine ecosystem, because if we lose it, then we could not recover it fully. So it is very important. So please conserve our ecosystem as best as possible, and then restore our degraded forest and degraded land as best as possible also. At least we could restore part of it, if not could restore the whole ecosystem and to fully restore to its original. But at least maybe we could restore and recover some important ecological functioning that maybe will be important for our life in the future and for our generation in generation. So that is, I think, my closing speech for this today webinar. Thank you very much, Gustavo, for your very interesting presentation. I think we get many new knowledge today, and I hope it will be insight you for your and inspire you also for your future research, maybe for the student or for your further works. And I hope you are also always in a good health. Thank you very much for everybody. And I apologize if there is any inconvenience during this seminar. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you.
Can we have the
Thank
copy
you.
already?